Hello and welcome back to a brand new DNF1 F1 podcast. I hope that you're all doing well and thank you as always for being here with us for a bit of F1 chat and discussion. And welcome back, F1 has returned. This weekend we are heading to the Dutch Grand Prix after a long summer break. Plenty of rest, plenty of opportunity for us to refresh, get away from Formula One, but we are very much back in the thick of it. And I, for one, cannot wait. Will we get a similar half season as we did in the earlier half of the season? We'll have to wait and see. Will we get a new winner in 2023? Perhaps someone other than Red Bull, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see. But it's going to be a very interesting story up and down the paddock. And to basically go through all of the new talking points of discussion heading into the Dutch Grand Prix, we have the DNF1 panel with us. We have Courtney Pine and Lee Wallington as always. Courtney, let's come to you first. How much are you looking forward to F1 getting back underway this weekend after the summer break in Zandvoort?
I'm looking forward to the F1 returning, obviously. Looking forward to seeing some of the midfield battles. But I'll leave it there.
Not much optimism by the sounds of it then at the front, but no, I totally understand the sentiments behind that, really, because, you know, we get away from the summer break. It's an opportunity for us to kind of unwind, reflect a little bit on what has happened this season, and perhaps build up a bit of excitement and renewed hope. But then realistically speaking, whilst the summer break is going on, very rarely do you ever see a team be able to do anything in a small amount of time, bearing in mind that they have to down tools under the regulations for a couple of weeks anyway. You very rarely see a change in the pecking order that much. However, new narratives can be ascertained in the second half of the season, and they most certainly will be developed as we draw to a conclusion many, many months away, of course, but we'll have to hold out hope that something different might happen. Lee, what about you? What are your sentiments and your thoughts going into the second half of this F1 season?
My thoughts are it's full of possibilities and hopes, but probably Max would come out and ruin them all.
I try to set it up as if we're going to get something different, but realistically, I can't disagree with either of you, to be honest.
It's obviously not taking anything away from Max and Red Bull, but there's plenty of wishing for closer fights and a lot of entertaining. My question for this weekend is, are we going to get a safety car from all the flares? It's got to happen eventually.
Well, that's it. Didn't they have this thing last year where they were trying to get fans to hand flares in, and in return they'd give them some stroopwafel?
Yeah.
Is that right? I mean, I'm sure I saw that somewhere. So maybe they'll have to try an initiative like that this year. Maybe it'll be a bit more successful. Although I certainly hope we don't get like what we got with that idiot. What was it, last year or the year before, where they thought it would be a funny idea to throw a flare onto the circuit whilst it was live. So, if you're going to the Dutch Grand Prix this weekend and you're enjoying yourself and you've had a few drinks, you're having a good time, don't throw a flare onto the circuit. Don't throw anything onto the circuit whatsoever. Don't be stupid. So, got to get that one out of the way. Can't be seen to condoning that kind of behaviour. So, disclaimer aside, or safety message aside, if you like, Dutch Grand Prix, F1 is back. And I think the first thing we got to talk about, other than the obvious dominance at the front, which I'm sure we'll get to in momentarily, is McLaren, the papaya team, the team that some people that aren't familiar with F1 may tune in thinking that, oh, those flares, are they McLaren fans in the stands? Is this a McLaren home circuit, as Lando Norris likes to pander to now and then on the radio? McLaren were the surprise package towards the back end of the first half of the season. And going into the second half of the season, surprise turns to expectation. And I'm pretty certain that McLaren fans and many, many excited onlookers will have high hopes for McLaren in the second half of the season. They have mentioned that the upgrades and development that they have done on their car to this point is far from the finished article. So what can we expect from McLaren in the second half of the season? Will they build on their recent progress and success to perhaps become the out-and-out closest rival to Red Bull, or maybe even challenge them? Or will it be more of a dogfight for them to try and stay in that position they're in and perhaps just make sure they finished ahead of the chasing pack? Lee, what are your thoughts on McLaren's second half?
My thoughts are that it's definitely going to be a second half that they're going to go from strength to strength. Obviously, we did think Mika Hakkinen was a bit of a nut job when he said McLaren will be the closest team to Red Bull, and they're obviously been proven right. And so I'm still going to go with Mika that he's going to that he was right, and that McLaren are going to hold on to their resurgence this season, and maybe not be easy, but they're going to definitely become the second fastest car for the second half of this season.
When did Mika say that? Did he say that in Monaco or was it Austria?
I know it was May, June, but I can't remember the.
It was saying
the
like
date.
I think it was saying at the British Grand Prix. I'll have to dig up the quote at some point, but I'm sure he said something like that. I remember. I thought the guy was nuts. I thought as he'd been finding his way into Kimi's alcohol cabinet again or something like that. But no, obviously we were wrong to doubt Mika, and we will never ever doubt Mika Hakkinen again, regardless of what he says in Formula One. But yeah, absolutely amazing stuff. And I think that pretty much epitomises the surprise factor that McLaren have injected into this 2023 season. Obviously, the story and the narrative has been Max Verstappen, Red Bull dominance, and we've been trying to find excitement in other aspects of the F1 hierarchy at the moment, mostly in the midfield and the chasing pack behind. But I don't think any of us could have expected McLaren to have such a resurgence that, in fairness, has been missing from them for well over a decade, quite frankly. So it's a real injection of fresh air and excitement that they've brought into this championship, and I sincerely hope that it continues. Courtney, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. Obviously, Lando Norris spearheading this attack for McLaren. Oscar Piastri too cannot be ignored as a rising star in F1 at this point in time. How central are those two going to be to McLaren's success in the second half of this season?
Well, I can safely say that every F1 fan, other than Red Bull fans, will be hoping that McLaren do take that step forward and at least challenge Red Bull. I think beating them would take a lot of work. But for them to at least give Red Bull something to scratch their heads about, make Max a little bit panicky on the old radio and make them think about strategy. At least give them something to think about because, I mean, in terms of entertainment, this season hasn't been good enough. But look, I'm not going to go down there because we're here to talk about McLaren. I just think it'd be very popular, not only because of what I just said. I think it'll also be popular because most people do seem to have a soft spot for McLaren. I think they seem to be most people's first, if not second team. And again, Lando Norris, I think a good amount of people have a soft spot for Lando. He's definitely brought some more energy into the sport. He's brought a new fan base along with him because of the personality that he brings. And I'm intrigued to see Lando Norris against Max Verstappen. We see that they're good friends when they're doing sim racing together and whatnot. But I'd be very interested to know how that dynamic would develop if Lando started to challenge Max.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. And look, Red Bull fans, Max fans, they're going to be tuning into this and probably rightly being annoyed at us for already talking about who's going to challenge Red Bull, who's going to challenge Max, who's going to be in a position where they could try and go toe-to-toe with him. Realistically speaking, whilst that would be amazing, of course, because we want to see that excitement and that competition up at the upper echelons of the F1 hierarchy at the moment, realistically speaking, the best we could probably hope for at this point in time, in the short to medium term, is that we don't end up with a situation where Max Verstappen is seriously contemplating pitting just to get the fastest lap so he can have an extra point, knowing full well he has about a 10-second buffer, or a half a minute buffer, if you like, between him and the car behind. Because that's the reality of F1 at the moment. Max Verstappen is starting to stretch his legs a bit. He's really letting the performance of the Red Bull RB19 shine, and he's complementing that beautifully. And as a culmination of all of that, you end up getting a one driver, one car race at this point in time. Now, as I said already, there are plenty of other stories and narratives to go down up and down the paddock, but a lot of interest and excitement is going to be who wins the race, who wins the championship. So, yes, as I said, none of us are expecting Red Bull and Max to not be dominant here again this weekend or for the majority of this season coming. But at the very least, we can hope for is that he's going to have to work a lot harder for it than he normally has had to the last few weeks. I mean, a quick note on Red Bull. before we finish off on McLaren, the story of Red Bull this season so far, guys, is that everyone has been saying that they've understood these new regulations so much better than everybody else. This concept of ground effect, they've really gotten on terms with it better than others. Is it as simple as that, or is it a case of, as Red Bull have tried to proclaim, that they've not necessarily been great, it's just everybody else has been that bad, and the fact that everyone is converging onto the Red Bull methodology suggests that F1 will get what it wants in a very similar chassis sport, but Red Bull are just the first team to get onto that.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of the two. I do think Red Bull have obviously done a great job. They obviously had the Adrian Newey, who obviously was still one of the few technical people who was around in his junior days in the last ground effects cars in Formula One. Obviously, if you believe the accusations that were thrown about the technical directive and spillover from other developments, they obviously do have their hypercars, so there is some knowledge of ground effect potentially, well, within the organisation, but potentially they could have looked at as an extra resource. Not saying that they did, but obviously that's why the technical directive was brought in. But also the other teams have done a brilliant job. The teams that you do think that are going to take it to Red Bull this year haven't. As we touched on in the last week's mid-season review, the Ferrari was the challengers for last year, and they've just imploded and somehow got worse than they were last year. So it is not all just down to Red Bull doing a great job. It is, as the Red Bull have been saying, it's the other teams have let the sport down and not doing a good enough job.
But this is what I like about Red Bull, to some respects. And as a Ferrari fan, it's hard for me to admit this, but I feel like it is relevant that Red Bull always seem to be that team that are looking for the, not necessarily loopholes, because that's not necessarily the right way of putting it, but they're looking for the certain small things, turning, not leaving any stone unturned, to try and find new ways to be better or gain an advantage on their competition. And if it comes in the form of the latest example of using, as you mentioned, the Valkyrie project, when they had that partnership with Aston Martin to try and, obviously, the purpose of that was design a super hypercar, I feel like, but they were able to use that technology and those lessons to translate that into something they could adopt in their Formula One program, which has obviously been, paramount to their success. Good on them. It's very clever. Until something like that gets outlawed, then by all means go for it. That's kind of what F1 is about. And for me, as much as I'm enjoying Red Bull's dominance as the next person that isn't a Red Bull fan at the moment, I can honestly say that if more F1 teams adopted that approach, not necessarily, partner up with a multi-million-dollar project that may not necessarily provide tangible returns in the form of money, but you can still do things like that and actually adopt that to your F1 program. Of course, within a cost cap now, because obviously they've changed the directive on that. But as I said, other teams aren't really doing that. Like Red Bull are, and they've done a great job with that. Mercedes might have done some things, and Ferrari, but not to the same degree or the same effect. And everyone else is just crossing their arms, being disappointed. But quite frankly, I don't know why you can knock Red Bull for that. It's very, very clever.
Yeah, I have to agree about some of the other teams faltering, and I think the teams that we naturally will look at here are Ferrari and Mercedes. And look, I don't want to take anything away from Red Bull, and I don't want to take anything away from Aston Martin and McLaren. But I do find it interesting that whilst Red Bull have got further away, let's say generally speaking, the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes are now starting to struggle with Aston Martin before their drop back before the summer break, and now McLaren. So it does. We are starting to get a picture now of exactly what is happening, and hopefully, the head scratching at Mercedes and Ferrari will start giving them the answers that they're looking for. But at the same time, I don't just want to be seeing it as Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull. I want to be seeing McLaren. I want to be seeing Aston Martin because, look, I'm all for the engineering excellence of Formula One. But it's a two-way thing for me. It's the engineering excellence and the entertainment factor. And the biggest selling point of the 2022 regulations was that we was going to see a lot more competitive racing for race wins. We see a lot more competition in the midfield and the podiums, which is fantastic. But I would say that most fans want to be seeing that level competition at the very top.
Exactly, and that's why I think what people have enjoyed certain elements of this season. It's not necessarily because Ferrari and Mercedes have been struggling. It's because the likes of Aston Martin and McLaren, teams that nobody expected to be in that picture, are now competing for podiums. And if something crazy happens to Max Verstappen in particular, which hasn't happened yet, or hasn't happened for a while, but if it does, they could be very much in prime position to take advantage of that, and that would be a wonderful thing to see. And you just have to see how things play out. So it certainly is an element of that to it. In terms of the rest of the season for Red Bull, the championships are both pretty much wrapped up at this point. In the case of Max Verstappen and the Constructors' Championship for the team. But there obviously is that very nice cherry on the top of a very, very lovely looking cake that Red Bull have baked for themselves at this point in time of winning every single race in a Formula One season. We've never had that before. And what Red Bull are doing right now, you could have asked us at the start of the season, and we all said we didn't think Red Bull were going to win every single race this season, purely and simply because surely at some point they were going to slip up. But right now, they've halfway through the season and they've already won every single race. There's no reason why they can't win the remaining, 10 races, 11 races to go? So, Dr. Helmut Marko, they asked him for a comment on this. He said, look, it's unlikely, but as every race goes and we keep winning, you've got to believe that it could actually happen. And maybe that's what Red Bull are trying to push for now, to try and see if they can win every single race. In your minds, guys, I'm going to put the question out there. Do you realistically think that Red Bull will, not can, will win every single race left this season?
I would have said no. I don't think they will. And that will be because reliability will hamper them in the second half of the season a lot more than the first half of this season. Obviously, we saw last time out the gearbox penalty Max took. And there'll be more components that will need to be replaced. That'll be outside the allowed quota. And yes, the Red Bull does come back through, but the other teams aren't standing still. Using McLaren as we've referenced to, McLaren will keep improving. And just to say, example, Max takes a whole new power unit and he's back 10 places, and the other teams are improving. It's not going to get so easy for him to come through the field to get that win. So I don't believe it will happen, just because the reliability effects will creep in as the teams get better.
And what about you, Courtney?
Yeah, completely agree with what you're saying there, Lee. I think the reference I want to use is the W11, the Mercedes W11 in 2020. Such a dominant car. Usually the car is used as an example when people say, "Oh, you're such a hypocrite. You won't complain when Mercedes are dominating." You can always look back at the podcast when we started for context. But anyway, towards the end of that season, we saw Red Bull closing in. And you think about how dominant Mercedes were that season, and if you're seeing teams start to get an idea of where they're going wrong, I think going back to original point, I think we're probably the team that are most likely to beat Red Bull on raw pace is the McLaren. But I think, as Lee's already said, reliability can play a part in it. And let's not forget, we're going to, we've got some tracks coming up, like Brazil in particular, that always throws up some interesting weather. For example, Singapore can always be a bit of a safety car, a lot of safety cars. We see plenty of incidents. So there's going to be some messy races coming up that will make that challenge a little bit harder for Red Bull. But if they were to win every single race this season, it wouldn't be the biggest shock in the world.
I'm going to go bold. I think they will. I just got this funny feeling in the pit of my stomach that I think that they will win every remaining race this season and complete a perfect season. That being said, the fact that I've just said it means that they're probably going to get a new winner this week and Red Bull won't win. So, sorry, Max Verstappen fans, but, I've jinxed it now. So, Unintentionally, of course. It wasn't part of like some sort of reverse
Forget
psychology.
the Nico jinx, it's now the Adam jinx.
Yeah. I'm not taking any garage selfies though, and although if they are superstitious and they want me to do that instead of Nico, if it brings them good luck, then I'm all for it. Give me all the paddock passes they can handle. But yeah, I don't know why. I just think what they're doing right now is absolutely incredible, especially Max Verstappen. And unless something crazy happens with reliability, then maybe. But I just feel like there are so many elements to reliability at the moment that last season we saw a lot of that. And as I said, when's the last time Max had a retirement from reliability? Like, what we're talking, Australia last season? It's like nearly 18 months ago.
I think the biggest killer, and it's been a thing I've mentioned a lot this season. I think the thing that makes a real difference when it comes to domination is the DRS efficiency, because you're looking at Max could get a 5 place penalty here, 10 place penalty here, because that DRS is so efficient compared to the competitors. These penalties don't really mean anything. It's just a case of guessing, when Max will get to the front. So I'm really, really hoping. Actually, my biggest hope going into next season is that obviously I'd like to see other teams catch up, but most really thing I want the most is to see the teams figure out how Red Bull are getting that level of efficiency from DRS, because it's kind of taken away what is entertained, what DRS was bought in for, because they've just sort of nerfed it. It just doesn't. It's not really giving us the desired effect when it comes to that particular team.
Have you seen there were some reports during the summer break that the FIA were seriously considering an option to ban using DRS in qualifying? Now, I mean, I'm not an expert when it comes to this sort of thing. And usually when I'm a bit unsure as to how this is going to play out, I usually go to the usual suspects that know a thing or two about the F1 cars. People like Gary Anderson, for example, Craig Scarborough, of course, Scarborough we've had on the show. Even our buddy Blake, or Break, aka, on Twitter. He's usually very good for a feed on there. Dr. Robs, of course. Bryson. We can name so many people that know so much more about F1 than I do. And the opinion I seem to have is similar to quite a few of theirs, where it's like, well, if we're trying to close the field up, closing DRS or stopping DRS use in qualifying is not gonna work. And if it's targeted at Red Bull, all right, it might slow them down a little bit in qualifying, but let's say Max Verstappen qualifies third on the grid. Like, all that's going to do is stop him from leading the race after lap 1. Like, it's not the source of their power, if you like. It's not the Achilles heel, pardon the pun, or anything like that. So, I don't know. I get why they're trying to make changes. I personally hate the idea of the FIA just making these random changes halfway through a season. I think it's stupid. I actually personally think the FIA should have a lot less power at changing regulations in Formula One altogether. I think F1, and in consultation with Liberty Media to a certain degree, obviously, want to put on the best show possible, should be more involved at the decision making on certain technical regulations than the FIA are. But that's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, I do get the point about the DRS. I don't think it's a successful idea if they do it. If they really want to, right, they're not going to say they're doing it because of Red Bull. But speaking plainly, of course they're doing it to target Red Bull. But if they want to target Red Bull, just make it the team that's first in the Constructors' Championship aren't allowed to use DRS for the entire weekend. There you go. That hampers them in qualifying, that hampers them in the race, and they will still win. So, but at least that's more open-ended, because qualifying second for Max, it's DRS ban. That's the first corner.
It's just got to be more subtle. Yeah, and just chuck him in an AlphaTauri. There you go. If you want to stop Max winning, that's how you do it. Chuck him in the Alpha, or chuck him in the Alfa Romeo. There you go. Definitely team at Red Bull together.
It does come back to this, the biggest identity crisis that Formula One has, and always has had, and always will have, and that is, you got the entertainment, but you don't want to be punishing teams for having an advantage. It's a really difficult thing. It's easy for us to say, sat on our chairs at home saying, what they need to do. But to strike that perfect balance is really, really difficult. And I don't envy whoever it is that has to make these decisions.
Oh, me neither. And do you know what the annoying thing is? Whenever they make these random changes halfway through the season, who's the one team that always gets hurt the most? Ferrari. Every single time. Like last season with the changes with the floors, obviously the changing of the tyres, Ferrari or probably Aston Martin hurt a bit more by that. I don't know how, and I can't really prove it, but I'm pretty certain Ferrari were more hurt by the outlawing of DAS than Mercedes were. I don't know how. I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that there's probably a metric there to prove that point. But it's beyond me.
That would be hilarious if they banned teams using qualifying, DRS in qualifying, and Ferrari go backwards. That would be...
Well, they probably would, because I think they were one of the other teams that benefited from their DRS system better than everyone else except Red Bull. It would, wouldn't it? Yeah. It's like Red Bull was still pole well at half a second, and all of a sudden Leclerc and Sainz are doing banzai laps to get out of Q1. It's like, where is this pace gone? Even on a circuit like Zandvoort, where DRS is a bit of a moot point. But we're getting off topic. Another topic of discussion before this weekend, Lewis Hamilton's contract. Now, we should put out a disclaimer. We are recording this preview quite early. So at the point in time, Lewis Hamilton agreeing a new deal with Mercedes is a rumour to us. We don't know if it has been confirmed yet. By the time you listen to this podcast, we may have got some news on this one. But we're going to entertain this as if he has agreed a new contract and that he's staying with Mercedes. First things first. It seemed inevitable. We expected Lewis to want to stay on with Mercedes. It looks like after many months of speculation, will he, won't he? Would Ferrari jump in to try and sign him of all teams? Would that happen? It does seem like Hamilton is committing the remaining years of his career to Mercedes and trying to see if this long-term project that they have can finally bring him the 8th World Championship that he so thoroughly deserves and probably feels that he should have by now. I mean, what are your thoughts, guys, on Hamilton committing his future at Mercedes? Is it the right move for him, or should he have perhaps seriously explored options elsewhere?
I think it's the right move for him to stay on. Obviously, he's refound the passion that he lost after how he felt he was robbed in 21. And obviously that suffered a bit at the beginning of last year, but he's now got that passion back, that fire in his belly. And as you said, he wants that 8th title. So if it's next year or 25, Mercedes will turn it around. Even if he happens to be around into 26, yeah, that's a whole new opportunity again. But he wants that 8th title. I think that's his big driving motivator. That's just firing Lewis and all motors. He may not have the speed that he had 10 years ago in one lap pace, although he's still very quick. His racecraft and the intelligence behind his driving is still up there at the top of his game. And Fernando has proved age doesn't mean you drop off anymore.
No, it doesn't. And obviously there will be questions raised for Lewis Hamilton. Does he still have what it takes to become a world champion again? Ultimately, what that means is he good enough in similar machinery to beat Max Verstappen in a 1v1 at the moment, like they were going head-to-head in 2021? Now, people will say, that's it's not that long ago that Hamilton and Verstappen locked horns that season, so, why should we expect Hamilton's ability to decline to such a degree where if it were to happen again, he wouldn't be able to beat Max Verstappen? But, a lot can happen in a short amount of time in Formula One. And Max Verstappen is certainly not at the level that he was in 2021. He's definitely better now than he was then. So I'm going to put the question to you guys. Let's be bold a little bit. Let's create some talking points from this one. If Hamilton, obviously, at this point, we don't know if he has agreed a new deal with Mercedes. We're assuming he has done, and it's been announced at this point, but it might just be rumours at this point. If that's all done, and in Mercedes over the next couple of years for the duration of his contract are able to produce a car that is on par with the Red Bull and Max and Lewis go toe-to-toe once again, does Lewis still have what it takes, in your opinion, to become a world champion once again and beat Max Verstappen?
First of all, I just want to say that halfway through what you just said there, Adam, I had a sudden urge to eat some ice cream. I don't know who that was at the ice cream van playing in the background. But
Mr. Soft Serve doing the rounds again, I see. But we just carry on. We're professionals here. That's exactly why we're so good at what we do.
Sorry to bait whoever it was up. But anyway, I feel it really comes down to where Mercedes and their ambitions lie in the future, because we know that Lewis is approaching 40 now, and you're right to bring up the Fernando Alonso point, Lee. But I feel the difference between Lewis and Fernando is, first of all, obviously Lewis has won 7 world championships, and you have a look at Fernando's career. If us casual fans feel that Fernando Alonso could have achieved a lot more championship wise, he's going to be feeling that a lot more. So I reckon Fernando wants to get at least another championship under his belt. Lewis has already won 7. He's pretty much done everything you can do in Formula One, and we know that Lewis is very vocal about his passion for other projects. So I don't think he would leave Mercedes. I feel that if he does get fed up with Mercedes over the next year or so, I think he will just leave the sport altogether.
Yeah, I mean, if he has signed a new deal, that will come with an element of belief that he still feels he has what it takes to do it one more time. I mean, ultimately, that's why he's hanging around in Formula One. Let's not beat around the bush here. I don't have to pretend I understand or even know what Lewis Hamilton is thinking to know that the reason he's still in F1 and didn't leave after 2021 when he could have done, and he would have been well within his rights to, is, because of how things went down and how ridiculous that was, is because he didn't win the 8th World Championship. If he had won it, he'd have been finished by now. He'd have gone onto other things and, put his talents and, humanitarian work elsewhere where it's really needed. So that has to come with it, and that has to be, deduced from this decision making. The question for me is, whilst he might believe that, and whilst Mercedes might believe that, Lewis Hamilton today or in 2 years' time against what Max Verstappen will be in 2 years' time, can Lewis still win? And I think that's a much harder question to answer. You can ask people and they'll probably say, yeah, of course he can, but you really have to dive deep into what Max Verstappen is going to be and think, as great as Lewis is, can he still beat Max in that position? And I'm not sure, if I'm brutally honest. I'd love to see it, but I'm not sure. I think what we're seeing in Max right now is just something ridiculous that he's getting better and better and better. It's just the question is, what can Lewis do to stop that in the right car?
I obviously do think that Lewis could at least have a close championship fight like we did with 21, if he had the right car. But as we already mentioned in our last week's episode, Lewis has already increased the amount of sim work he does. And this is a guy that's famously known for avoiding any sim work at all costs, because he hated it. He didn't see the purpose of it because his talent just was good enough. And the fact that he's now doing some work, yes, the Mercedes car isn't there where he wants it to be, but he's also fully aware this new generation drivers are coming through. All they do is sim when they're not on the track. And that's something he's obviously recognised that is missing from his own skill set. So as long as he's maybe not ever do the same amount of sim as Max, but still a step in the direction that he's acknowledged a weakness and improved. And we saw the steps that Lewis took after he lost to Nico in 2016, which actually drove Lewis to even further heights, that defeat in 2016. So it could all be well and good that the defeat to Max in 21 has potentially driven Lewis to new steps again that we're not going to see until a potential close championship.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, whilst I've just already said a few minutes ago that I think if it were to happen in, say, a couple of years' time, if Mercedes do put Lewis in equal machinery to Max, that Max will most likely come out on top, in my opinion. Lewis is by far the best option of the chasing pack that could go toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen right now in equal machinery and beat him. I don't think there's any argument to that. What we've seen this season has just been... I think you have to look for the certain nuance behind it, but I do feel that Lewis has been an absolutely huge part as to why Mercedes are in the position they are in right now, where they just look at it and think, all we need is a better car, and we're back to winning ways again. George has been good, but he's not been anywhere near as good as Lewis has at the moment. And at the same time, other than Fernando Alonso, and you have to base this on the earlier part of the season rather than where we are right now recently, I can't think of anyone else that's been better in 2023, with the exception, obviously, of course, of Max Verstappen than Hamilton right now. And I think that's a facet of it that I am enjoying with watching Lewis Hamilton right now, is that, of course, he doesn't have the dominant car that he used to. And he may be in a position that no matter what he does, he's not going to win. But in those moments, you start to realise how good this guy really, really is, and still is. So there is a glimmer of hope there. Even if I'm not backing him out of the two, I still think he's by far the best option.
Yeah, he definitely is.
Adam, you're gonna hate me, but I do have
not as much
theory.
as the Lewis Hamilton fans in the comment section will right now, but do try. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be objective.
I have a theory, and I'm just saying about who would challenge Max in the future. I feel that Charles Leclerc would have a decent chance of challenging Max over the course of a season if he was to reinvent himself and leave Ferrari.
Yeah, I was about to finish that and say, yeah, he has to leave Ferrari first. Oh, God, my life. Anyway, let's move on. Fernando Alonso, let's talk about him briefly before we do our predictions at the end. Obviously, Fernando Alonso, great first half of the season. A lot of people, myself included, went out and said that he was the best driver, with the exception of Max Verstappen in the first half of the season. A lot of that was owing to, the great performances he put in the early part of the season. 5 podiums out of the first 6 races. Still P3, in the Drivers' Championship. Obviously, Perez ahead of them. It's going to be a strange one for Fernando, because right now, as the last 2 races have shown, he's really having to dig out results and try and get some decent points on the board. He got a great result in the main race in Belgium, despite all the issues that they were having. And for me, if Aston Martin aren't able to keep up, this could be a very depressing second half of the season for Fernando Alonso. And I really hope that that's not the case.
Yeah, I do believe that Aston Martin are going to have a fight on to not finish 5th in the Constructors' Championship. As McLaren and to a degree Ferrari are coming for them. And that's just going to be a losing fight against the resurgent behemoth as McLaren was a decade ago. And obviously Ferrari getting its act together, hopefully. That's a very strong hopefully, but I'm sure Ferrari can manage it.
You've got to put something on the wish list.
It's I think it's going to be very painful, but I'm sure Fernando will be doing some brilliant displays of, especially defensive driving. Remember, he's very good at defensive driving, and I'm sure he's going to be putting some fine drives in for the rest of the season.
Well, he's going to the right circuit for defensive driving. And he'll have to, I think, to secure the better results. I mean, people will say, oh, well, if Aston Martin are the 5th fastest team, obviously Fernando's not going to have to do much defending, but if he can put it together and get a performance out and pull it out like he so often does, then absolutely, why not? Courtney, obviously, we talk a lot about Fernando Alonso and how great he's been first half of the season, and obviously he's going to have to dig in to try and get Aston Martin the best results possible. Does this mean now the impotence has to be to try and get Lance Stroll into the mix as well? Because by and large, he's been very much a forgotten man for perhaps the second quarter of this F1 season. He very much needs to turn up after the summer break. Now that he's physically 100% again, he really needs to get stuck in and help his team out.
I completely agree. I know it's very easy to go in on Lance Stroll, but unfortunately I have to on this occasion. And just
love it.
So it's a guilty pleasure. No, it's you have a look at. Let's say hypothetically speaking, we get towards the end of the season, and our predictions are correct, and Aston Martin sort of finish 5th. They're going to look back on the season and think we missed an opportunity to pick up a decent amount of points when we were, on average, faster than Mercedes and not only Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari, and we didn't completely capitalise on this opportunity because both of our drivers weren't on it, and this is exactly why Lance Stroll needs to be on his game, because if we're to get this tight, if we're going to continue to have this tight midfield battle that we expect in the second half of the season, you need both your drivers to be on point, and that's exactly why Mercedes are second. It's mainly because of the performances that both of their drivers have been putting in. George Russell, we know he can do better, and I reckon he will. You look at Ferrari. Carlos Sainz, he's inconsistent, but he's a lot more consistent than Lance Stroll. And then McLaren, they've got two fantastic young drivers. So if you just look at the driver partnerships of all those teams I just mentioned, you would say Aston Martin is the weakest, and that is partly mainly because of Lance Stroll.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens with Aston Martin this weekend. Can they get back in the mix with the leading teams? So let's move on to the second half of this podcast, and in particular with the preview, we do our prediction categories. Now, for those of you that are new and that you've just discovered the show, first of all, hope you're doing well. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel, and of course leave us a 5-star review on your favourite pod platform. But in this part, we do our predictions, and the way it works is we have a set list of prediction categories, and the three of us will do our best to try and get our best predictions. Now, I did say before the summer break that I was going to tally up all the points so far. Admittedly, I haven't done that because, being me, I've forgotten all about that. So I promise I will definitely do that before the next race. So please do call me out on it if I forget again. But I will do my absolute best to make sure I don't. So I do apologise for that one if you are hoping for an update on the scoreboard at this point in time. And hopefully I'm probably last. I deserve to be. My predictions have been absolutely dreadful. But the first category is the best surprise category. Now, this goes to the driver that we think, or team, that will provide the best good surprise of the weekend. So, Courtney, I'm going to come to you first. Who's going to be your best surprise this weekend?
I'm going to say that George Russell, I think the surprise for me is that George Russell will beat Lewis this weekend. I feel that George... Yeah, I feel that George would have been really disappointed with how his form went. And I think after a summer break, he's gonna come back with a sort of a new sense of vigor. And yeah, I think that he will make that difference. And I think sometimes Lewis can be a little bit slow at the blocks after a summer break. We often saw that in Spa. So this could be an opportunity for George to sort of get his season back on track.
I like that because George Russell is definitely a driver that I think would have gone into the summer break plenty to reflect on. Probably didn't go as well as he would have hoped, considering how good he was towards the tail end of last season. And, you know, there's been a lot said about the relationship between him and Hamilton at the moment in the garage. You know, obviously there is not necessarily a divide, but obviously, you know, there have been some tensions this season and a bit of a conflict brewing between the two on the circuit. It's not really spilled out into the media or anything crazy like that, which is a good thing, of course. But obviously, George Russell will be measuring his performance against his teammate. And I think we can all agree, and I'm sure he would too, it's not been as good as he hoped it would have been. So I think the second half of the season, as you said, Courtney, George really needs to get his act together and start to remind people as to why he was such an exciting talent and why Mercedes wanted him in that car in the first place. Because he might not be as good as Lewis right now, but he is certainly a lot closer to that level than he probably has shown in recent weeks before the summer break. So let's move on to Lee, your best surprise. Who is it going to be?
My best prize is Carlos Sainz.
Oh, interesting. Please elaborate. Why is the Ferrari man going to be your best surprise?
I think he's going to come out of the summer break with a point to prove. There's obviously, if you believe any of the rumours that are going on at the moment, although they are a bit contradictory, there's obviously the rumours that him and Charles have fallen out. There's rumours that him and Ferrari have fallen out. There's rumours that he's got a pre-contract with Audi. Even if one of those are true, he's going to obviously want to go make a statement point that he hasn't fallen out, or he's on top of, he's beating Charles. He doesn't need to worry about Charles. He doesn't need to worry about leaving the team, or he has going to be leaving the team, and just going to show you why Audi sort of potentially got a pre-contract with him. And I think he's going to be strong, and he's going to be get a stronger result than Charles this weekend.
Well, it's very interesting. By the sounds of it, the summer break that Red Bull had was Christian Horner's big barbecue in his back garden in the wonderful home that he seems to have from what we've seen on Netflix. And Ferrari's summer break was basically one big intervention. But the problem was everybody was intervening each other. Like no one knew who the actual central point was, just like the Spider-Man meme. Anyway, look, all jokes aside, my best surprise this weekend, those are some really good ones. I actually feel a little bit disappointed. Mine's underwhelming. But I'm going to say Lance Stroll.
For the same, underwhelming.
Yeah, well, for the same reasons that you both give with George and Sainz, the same logic, like, you know, that they really need to step up. And I think that's kind of the theme, you know, coming into the second half of the season after a break. It's kind of like the winter break in football to a degree, you know. You can kind of reignite those fires. It's like the first day of the season all over again. You know, you can really lay down a marker for the rest of the season and make the first half completely redundant, because obviously it's not how you start, it's how you finish that counts. And Formula One is certainly paramount to that mantra. So why not? Flop of the weekend. I'm going to go first on this one. There's one team that jumps out to me, and that's Alfa Romeo. I'm not even going to pick a driver. I'm just going to say Alfa Romeo. And based on anyone that listened to our mid-season report or review, if you like, will know exactly why I'm not really the biggest Alfa fan this season. I just think they've been massively underwhelming, and just because of the transitional reasons and everything else, I just can't see that changing. So yeah, that's Alfa Romeo for me. Courtney, what about you, mate?
I'm going to say Logan Sargent. The reason I'm saying Logan Sargent is because there is still a sizable gap between him and Alex Albon, and I also feel that the characteristics of Zandvoort will not suit the Williams at all.
Yeah, it's a tough one with Logan Sargent, because as good as Alex Albon has been, again, another driver that perhaps he's had that first half of the season to find his feet. Perhaps Williams will start to be a little bit more demanding, but remains to be seen. We'll have to wait and see what happens with him. Lee, who's going to be your flop of the weekend?
Mine is the same as Courtney and Logan Sargent for similar reasons. Plus, I think there's growing pressure starting to build within the team on him. Obviously, there's the commercial aspect, which I think is obviously helping. But there are obviously the summer rumours at all. There's growing pressure to replace Logan with Mick. Obviously, I'm sure Mercedes are applying that pressure as well, because they would love to get Mick back on the circuit. And I think it's going to be pressure, and I just don't think that Logan's going to be able to sustain the pressure that's starting to build on him.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, it's a tough one, because we've not heard too much in the in trusted media sources or from Williams at all that Logan Sargent should be feeling the pressure or is under pressure of potentially not keeping his seat. It's very much a Red Bull AlphaTauri thing, or I say AlphaTauri, it's more of a Red Bull thing, to be so public about these kind of situations. But I wouldn't rule out something like that happening towards the end of the season. You know, I think at Williams, it just becomes, it's not necessarily a case of you're not good enough for it. It's a case of there are better options available. And, you know, obviously we're going to want that if we're going to make progress. And whilst Williams are making tangible progress up the field, obviously they don't want to waste opportunities by not having the adequate drivers in their car. And, you know, I did say at the start of the season, you've got to give Logan Sargent time. He has had some time, so we'll have to wait and see how he performs in the second half with a bit more experience under his belt. Pole position. Do I even need to ask? No. Who's it going to be?
Max.
Yeah. Race winner? Max. There we go. Podium. That was nice and easy. So podium. No, Max is already on the podium. He's won the race, Lee. Second and third. This one gets a little bit more interesting and it requires a bit more thought at the moment. So, Lee, seeing as you're so keen, I'll let you go first on this one.
Lando and Lewis.
Oh, I like that. Any reason why?
I think McLaren will be quite strong this weekend. I think he said the circuit's characteristics will suit them a bit more than last time out. And obviously Lando's feeling a bit happy with the car, although he still says it doesn't suit his driving style. He's doing a very good job of hiding it. And I think Lewis is just on fire at the moment, and he's just in a happy place. The car's working for him. All right, it's not the performance that he wants, but it's just getting there slowly for him, and I think he's just going to have a strong weekend.
Yeah, the summer break came at a bad time for Lewis and Lando because they were really hot on form and doing a great job, respectfully. And now obviously there's a time to reset things and it might not necessarily go their way. So, yeah, I like that podium. Courtney, who's on your podium?
I'm going to stick with a British bias theme, and I'm going to say Lando second and George Russell in third. I naturally would want to go with Sergio Perez, but he's still proving to be fairly inconsistent, particularly in qualifying, and we've touched on it already. The characteristics of the circuit means that the Red Bull DRS advantage won't be as large as usual. So I feel that some defensive driving will be able to keep a couple of lads ahead of him.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with Perez because, again, another driver that has had plenty to reflect on during the summer break. Obviously would have been very, very strong in the early parts of the season, but since Baku, he's only got one podium that we can remember, and that was at the last race at Belgium. And even then, he was comfortably beat by his teammate. He's never really been the same since Miami, actually, which I think is his last podium, mind you, not Baku. So, yeah, a driver that, okay, there is some pressure on him. I don't think his seat is really under threat for 2024, but obviously he's got to make sure he proves to Red Bull that doesn't become a question that gets asked throughout the second half of this season. And this is a great place to make a name for yourself and obviously, put those questions to bed. For me, I'm going to back Perez this weekend, despite the fact that I've been quite critical of him in the last episode. I was very critical of him. But I'm going to back Perez to put that right, finish P2. And I am going to go with... Tough one, because the characteristics of the circuit would lend themselves to cars that have got a lot more mechanical grip and are good in the slow corners and somewhat to the medium speed corners, which would, first thing in my head I would think of is probably Charles Leclerc. But then I remember Hungary, and I realised Ferrari absolutely nowhere. And if, the car is very sensitive to that working range they keep going on about, so it's so hard to predict them. So I'm just going to go and just say Hamilton, just because I think that's probably a safer bet for a prediction. As much as I'd love to see Ferrari prove me wrong and finish second and third, fingers crossed. But best of the rest. So this category, best of the rest, this is for the best finisher that isn't driving currently in a Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston Martin, and now McLaren, because those are comfortably the top 5 teams right now. So we basically got Alpine, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Williams, and Haas. Who is going to be finishing highest out of all of those? Courtney, let's go to you first on this one.
I'm going to say Pierre Gasly.
Lee, what about you?
I swear I'm not copying Courtney, but yeah, Pierre Gasly.
All aboard the Gasly train. I was thinking the same thing. So there
Gasly.
we go. I love having Ricciardo back. Bold prediction. So obviously for this one, guys, if you're new to this bold prediction is something completely out of the ordinary or something we think is going to be a rather bold one. May not necessarily happen, but it's worth double points if it comes through. So Lee, you were talking to me about a bold prediction that you were struggling to think of. So I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to give me your bold prediction.
Well, my bold prediction is not race result, but it is Formula 1 weekend specific. And that is I believe there'll be a growing rumour of fallout, although nothing's been announced, regarding the cost cap breaches. That obviously the certificates have been delayed again, and we know how that went last year. And now the first race back, the press will be on it. There'll be teams and the rumour mill will be going overdrive about what's happening, who potentially has breached, and what. I think this weekend it's going to sort of implode in the FIA's face, a bit like it did in Singapore last year.
Yeah, very much so. And obviously back then, Red Bull and Aston Martin were very much reported as the teams very much under scrutiny. So this year, apparently it's Red Bull, Mercedes and Aston Martin again. Is that right? That potentially, as I said, I'm just speculating here. I'm not talking about it as if I have any sort of knowledge of what's going on with this right now. But I wouldn't be surprised, Lee, if that did come out and it mars the whole weekend because everybody's talking about the cost cap. As fun as that was in Singapore, certainly didn't enjoy that. Courtney, what's your bold prediction, mate?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to Pierre Gasly again. He's been able to get a couple of decent qualifying results in that Alpine this season. And again, we've mentioned the characteristics of this circuit making overtaking a bit more difficult. So I feel that Pierre Gasly will have a comfortable top 10 finish.
I like it. I am going to go... Oh, this is a tough one. It's a tough one. I'm going to go with another top 10 finish, but I'm going to go with Yuki Tsunoda. And this should be bold because the AlphaTauri really struggles with a lack of mechanical grip. So this should be a circuit where this should be absolutely dreadful. But I've got to say, Yuki Tsunoda proven to be F1's pocket rocket at the moment. And that is not a dig or a pun at his height. But seems rather appropriate because right now he's really on it. He was great at Belgium. Didn't expect him to be that good. And I think he's going to go strong again this weekend. I really hope he does because I think his performances this season have very much gone under the radar because of how bad AlphaTauri have been. And I almost feel like there is a risk of that happening further just because Daniel Ricciardo is the one where all the eyes are going to be on him for obvious reasons.
Oh yeah, all the eyes are going to be on Daniel Ricciardo are coming into this weekend and what he can deliver. Puts the pressure on Yuki to respond in kind.
Absolutely. Of course, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But guys, let us know your predictions for this weekend's Dutch Grand Prix. And of course, your thoughts to some of the news topics that we've already discussed. Get them in the comment section on the YouTube channel. Of course, if you listen to this show on your favourite podcasting platform, head over to the YouTube channel. Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And while you're there, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as always. But until then, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, as always. And we'll be back for the Dutch Grand Prix review, where I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about at another weekend, where, of course, Max and Red Bull are the favourites. But let's see if they can really go all the way and win every single race. I have to wait and see. But until then, guys, thanks for tuning in as always. Please stay safe, and we will see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. And remember, as always, if you're not first, you're probably DNF1. Take care.
See you soon.
Goodbye.